The agenda is set. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. It's time to talk. A typhoon's terror, the world rushing in to help the Philippines. Are we doing enough? Are we to blame? Pictures that paint 1,000 questions, the mystery of a huge art find in Munich. And a nest of spies and a haven for hacktivists. Welcome to Berlin. Welcome to the show, everyone. I have invited three people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest is Berlin's top security guard for all information classified for your eyes only. I am happy to welcome to the show Alexander Dix. He is the Data Protection Commissioner for the government of Berlin. Alexander, good to have you on the show. My second guest is known as a kind of James Bond in the murky world of tracking down sellers and dealers and reuniting art with its rightful owners. I'm happy to welcome to the show Willi Korte. He is going to be lending us his 007 senses today to talk about this Munich story. Willi, it's good to have you on the show. And my next guest is a religious leader in the Filipino community right here in Berlin. I'm happy to welcome Father Simon Boiser to the show. He's a Catholic priest from the Philippines with a congregation right here in Berlin. Father Simon, let's just start out by asking, have you and your congregation, have you been able to find out what's going on in the Philippines? Have you been able to make contact with people back home?
Since the past 2 days, we've been trying to make contacts with our relatives and families in the Philippines. It's quite difficult to have these contacts. We tried to call through telephones. We could not establish some contacts. So we're able to contact some people through the internet, through emails, and through Facebook.
And what are you hearing?
It's very, very chaotic. Some Filipinos feel they are quite shocked by the magnitude of this catastrophe. There are people who say they are still looking for their missing family members. There are people who are trying to organize some relief goods. They have problems with the transportation.
Let me just ask all of you here at the table with me today, the impact of this disaster. Do you think the world has realized exactly what has happened to the Philippines? What would you say?
Well, I think it always takes a certain amount of time to realize that that's a huge disaster, one of the strongest typhoons ever to have been registered. But I hope the world will wake up to this challenge and react appropriately very soon.
We're going to talk about reactions just a second. Willi, what would you say?
Well, I was in New York not too long ago when Hurricane Sandy hit, and that's supposed to be a very well-organized place. And everything broke down in southern Manhattan, so I can only imagine what it means for the people in a country like Philippines that were even hit harder than Hurricane Sandy hit New York.
Exactly, and Father Simon, the people in the Philippines, I mean, they had a warning that a monster storm was approaching, didn't they?
Yeah, they have this warning already 2 days before the catastrophe came, but the people, not all of them have the access to communications. Not all of them have televisions and radios. The militaries came there and sent people away, but they find refuge in churches, in schools, but that was not a safe place.
Yeah, we've got some staggering numbers that are coming out of the Philippines in the wake of Typhoon Haiyan. I want to read those for you. The Red Cross says that it has placed an initial order for 10,000 body bags. In just one of the devastated villages in the path of the storm, more than 400 bodies have been counted. A mass grave is where they are being buried. UNICEF estimates that 10 million people have been impacted by this disaster. About half of them are children. And just this week, 12,000 women are expected to give birth in the middle of this misery. Well, their health at this point cannot be guaranteed.
Typhoon Haiyan is the worst natural disaster ever to hit the Philippines. Hundreds of people have already been confirmed dead, but authorities fear the death toll could surpass 10,000. And this despite large-scale preventive safety measures before the storm hit. Philippine authorities had moved some 800,000 people to sturdy evacuation centers, schools, churches, and other public buildings. But they were no match for the extreme winds of Super Typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda as it's being called in the Philippines. Now, the big problem is getting aid to the survivors, a logistical challenge for the poor Southeast Asian archipelago nation of over 7,000 islands. Roads, transportation, and communications have been devastated by the storm. The Philippine president has declared a state of national calamity.
Father Simon, you know, we've got people watching us around the world, lots of Filipinos watching who are not in the Philippines. They go to churches just like yours. What are you telling your congregation here in Berlin? How can they help, and how should they deal with this catastrophe?
Last Sunday we had our Holy Mass, and we began this Holy Mass with a 1 minute of silence, praying for the victims in the Philippines. And we also said that our Mass collections will be sent to the victims of the Philippines. And these coming weeks we're going to send our collections. We are also open for donations from all over the country. And since Sunday, there are donations coming in to our parishes. They're willing to give anything. We're not rejecting any help. We are very thankful for this. And we hope we could do more than praying and more than collecting things and donations. We're still trying to coordinate our actions here in Berlin.
All right, and what are you able to do here in Berlin besides praying? I mean, talk to me about the help that you're getting right now.
We're trying to contact some people in the Philippines, some of my confreres, some of my colleagues working in this region, and they're trying to tell us that they still need help. There are logistical problems happening in the Philippines. They're very thankful that the international community is helping the Philippines from all over the world. We're watching the development of events, and we're trying to relay information to other people, trying to contact Filipinos living in Germany that we should help.
I want to talk about the international response, but let me ask you, coming from the Philippines, is the Filipino government doing all that it can and all that it should?
This has been the major actions of the government in the past months. Last month there was a strong earthquake which also befell near this region, and the president of the Philippines came there. The government is trying to help the people, trying to be present among the people, but I have the impression that the government is also kind of they're not up to the task. That's why we are very happy that the international community is helping us.
And when you say the international community, who do you mean specifically?
We have received help from the US, from the UK, and from Europe.
Okay. Let me ask other gentlemen, Alexander and Willi, what about this international relief effort right now? I mean, there is no way that any country can deal with what this typhoon has done. You
well,
agree?
I'm just wondering how well organized was the help since the storm was announced way in advance. I mean, what was the government in communication with the international community? I mean, was everybody ready for the storm? Because you said the government is overwhelmed.
Some of the militaries and soldiers went to the southern part of the Philippines where this earthquake happened, and they're sending airplanes to this region beforehand, and they were able to lift people out of the region, but there were not enough airplanes and helicopters.
Because we hear this regularly after this disaster, that one could have been better prepared. And I wonder, when is it going to happen that we will be?
Well, I think in the Philippines, what I've been reading, what our reporters are telling us is that it's an issue of being prepared, but it's also an issue of what people are willing to do without being forced to do. And everyone along the coastal regions, which is where most people live, were told to evacuate and to go to safety centers. But obviously they didn't do that. And the question is, okay, we have a disaster now, so there are some voices coming out and saying, well, who should get help now? The people who evacuated or the people who didn't?
That's a nice point, because some people don't want to leave their houses willingly. They say, if I will go back, do I still find my house? Do I still find my belongings? So it's quite difficult sometimes to convince people to get out of the area. And some people say, I believe in God, I trust in His mercy, I could just stay here, and if I have luck, I could survive.
Well, we have the same in the United States. People build on the beach, where their houses are being hit, you know, whenever a hurricane comes on shore. And yeah, they don't seem to want to move either.
But the government, isn't it the government's job Alexander, don't you think, isn't it the government's job to make it harder for people to live, for people to stay in places where we know natural disasters are going to hit?
Well, we had a flood, not to be compared with what's happening in the Philippines right now, but in Germany we had floodings this summer, and the river Elbe left his bed and destroyed a couple of cities very badly. And we had a discussion beforehand what can be done to prevent this happening again in the future by providing for spaces where nothing should be built in the future anymore. So even sort of tearing down buildings or banning farmers to farm land in these spaces, just to leave it to the river to be as a kind of reservoir in terms of high water. But that has to be legislated for. It has to be done by the government and provided for. There's strong resistance in the population, in the communities against such measures. It's a difficult political task, but I agree. This has to be some measures have to be taken by the government. Otherwise, it won't be followed.
I'm wondering if the Filipino government's doing that. I mean, you know, we've got the UN climate talks taking place right now in Warsaw, and the Philippines has wasted no time drawing a connection between the typhoon and climate change. And they've made an appeal for a deal to be reached at the climate talks and for something to be done. Are the Philippines, like many developing countries, are they trying to put the bill on the table of the developed world?
I think there's enough laws or bills in the Philippine government regarding this issue. But I think the present government has many tasks to fulfill. They have a list of priorities. There is this task of fighting corruption in the government. There's this task of alleviating the poverty in the country. So I think this prevention of natural disasters or helping the risks of suffering from the disasters is not in the top priority list. But now in this year, since they say that there's an average of 20 big typhoons happening in the Philippines, then maybe it is high time now to give more time and money for this issue.
Father Simon, what about the world's moral responsibility? We here in the West, we know that we're the biggest polluters. We have been for the past century. Don't we have a moral obligation then to help parts of the world that are going to suffer because of climate change and suffer because of these storms?
I don't know if I'm in the position to place blame on anybody else, but I notice among the Philippines, if you ask them, who is to blame for this calamity? And some people will think, they will think directly about God, because you know the Filipinos are spiritual people. They tend to explain what is happening to them through the eyes of their faith, through the eyes of their religion. So maybe they will say, maybe it's part of my sin, or I have to atone for my sins. It has to do with my relationship with God. Maybe in Europe, if something similar is happening, they will explain it through the global warming or the climate change.
Yeah, I mean, that's the explanation we're getting, that this is climate change, and now we're getting the bill for everything. I mean, what about the responsibility of the rest of the world, Willi?
Well, it seems to be exceedingly difficult to come to some sort of compromise that is accepted by everybody. I don't know how long these international efforts have been going on. I don't even remember, but it must have been many years. And if I remember correctly, if I remember correctly, there's always somebody, usually some country or some group of countries, that can't agree with a certain provision within whatever agreement they seem to be working on. So I'm not sure that we are making great progress in terms of being proactive.
But is it our responsibility?
Well, it is, but I think we are basically just responding reactively to the next disaster. And
is that the future? We're continue to react, Alexander, or do we need to own up to what we've done?
I think we have to be more proactive and reach some kind of compromise, as Willi Korte has said. And I would like to add, to come back to what Father Simon said in the beginning, the lack of information on the ground for many people. So access to information and communications means should be evenly distributed around the globe. And if we sort of help the Philippines and other countries and in this situation, we should also sort of look to improve the communication and communication infrastructure. That's very important.
I know, we've got these big military shipments coming in from the U.S. and the U.K., which is obviously a strong sign of help. But I want to read you something that was on the cover of the Financial Times today. There was an article, obviously, about the U.K. sending in $6 billion worth of aid to the Philippines today. And under that was an article about a banker from the city in London complaining about his bonus this year only being around $4 billion. Where is reason here? Are we not, obviously we're not doing enough to help people in trouble if a banker can earn $4 billion? This
is a very universal question about social justice in the world, and how do we divide our wealth in the world. And I think we could discuss and philosophize about this. But in this situation now in the Philippines, we are really very thankful for every help we could get from the government.
I mean, it was 4 million. I want to clear that up. Yes. It was 4 million. It was 4 million there.
I would like to get back to what you have said. People have plenty of suggestions in how to solve this problem. They have always a suggestion how to recognize, to make this long recovery program, and we should build more infrastructures. But I think it's a question of resources also. When natural disasters are happening throughout the country in a span of 3 months, almost every week, how could you respond there? It seems that you're losing resources and you have limited time to respond.
Before we move on, Father Simon, you're obviously, this is also your home. Where do you see the Philippines going from here?
It's really quite difficult now to make a picture of this. I've been thinking, this is not the end of these catastrophes. So, if you base it on the statistics, we are still expecting more storms in the coming weeks. And maybe next year the storms will come, maybe not as strong as the storm last Saturday. So I think it's really quite difficult really to have these recoveries. And the question of the human, the destinies, the people who suffered, who lost their families, their time to grieve, it's really quite complicated.
Yeah, we certainly do wish the people of the Philippines all the best as we move forward from this. We want to move on, and we want to move to a case with seemingly more questions than answers at this point. And it forces Germany's government, its people, and the art world to once again confront the crimes of the Nazis. Last week, an amazing find came to light. In early 2012, tax collectors in Munich found an estimated 1 billion euros worth of art stashed in an apartment. Why it took almost 2 years for the authorities to make the discovery public is just one of the mysteries in a case accompanied by ghosts of the past.
What's being called a Nazi art trove, 1,400 artworks worth up to 1 billion euros, was found in the Munich apartment of Cornelius Gurlitt, the son of powerful Nazi-era art dealer Hildebrand Gurlitt. Many of the works by such artists as Picasso, Matisse, Renoir, Marc Chagall, and Otto Dix are believed to have been seized by the Hitler regime. Even though German tax authorities confiscated the collection in early 2012, the story has only just come to light, sparking criticism of Germany for dragging its feet on the restitution of artworks seized by the Nazis. Now, under pressure from abroad, German prosecutors have commissioned a task force to speed up the process and revealed that hundreds of the paintings may have been stolen from Jewish owners or bought from them under duress.
Willi, what's your take on this? I mean, you've been on cases like this before. Why has it taken the government so long to present this information to the public?
Well, the government didn't really decide on its own to present anything. As you know, they were basically caught with their pants down by it being in the press a week ago. I'm somewhat amazed how, considering the ingredients of this case, meaning a story from the Nazi past, Jewish assets associated with the Nazi past, in other words, something that Germany has gone through several times over the last 20 years, that Berlin government didn't intervene and take over, so to speak, from the very beginning, including...
Do you think Berlin knew, though, from the very beginning? I mean, this thing's been going on since early 2012.
Well, and apparently, besides the authorities in Bavaria, Berlin didn't do anything with it, and that's what amazes me, that they let this go on for a year and a half in Munich and Augsburg with the authorities without setting up some sort of an infrastructure whereby various institutions, individuals would get involved, including, of course, a PR strategy. How are we going to present this to the public, and how are we going to continue then working with this, with the public's eye on this whole story?
The district attorney in Augsburg, he's on this case, and he said this is a criminal case. We're talking about tax evasion right now. Alexander, the district attorney is appealing to privacy laws in Germany, and he says the privacy laws surrounding a criminal case right now have top priority. So he's singing your song, isn't he?
Well, I'm not only a data protection commissioner, but also a freedom of information commissioner. So I think the balance that has to be struck here is between privacy and the public interest in certain information. And I believe they used privacy as a pretext not to disclose information. They could have disclosed information earlier. I don't know what happened during the last 1.5 years, what they did. Apparently they did not realize the sheer dimension of what they actually found.
Yeah. But Willi, do you believe that? Do you believe they didn't realize what they had on their hands?
Well, it seems to be that way, but what I don't understand how is that they couldn't have realized it. Again, we have had these stories about various aspects of the Nazi past before, and it's always the same sort of development. The whole world takes an interest. Pressure mounts from New York, London, Tel Aviv. The government has to respond. The demands are always the same: openness, transparency. The world needs to be able to see, understand what's going on. So everything that I think happened or didn't happen in the last 1.5 years sort of seems to be wrong from that perspective, because the prosecutor obviously in Augsburg is not there to sort out 1,400 works of art. He has allegedly a tax violation to deal with.
Right, and the research shows that they had one person, one art historian helping them on this case, and maybe they were overburdened by it. Who knows? What does your detective nose tell you about this case? I mean, the man who was in the apartment where this art was found, we don't really know where he is right now, but he's a free man. There's no arrest warrant out for him on tax evasion charges, on anything.
Well, his father, Hildebrand Gurlitt, was obviously a very prominent art dealer in the Nazi period, and his two main projects were, one, dealing with the so-called degenerate art, and two, providing works of art, particularly from France in his case, for what was then called the Linz Hitler Museum. So he was involved in two major art transaction projects. And the art that has reappeared seems to reflect that in terms of what it is and where it came from. What I think was overlooked also is that of course, Hildebrand Gurlitt has a long track record in the archives. What surprised me is when I heard the story, there was talk about works of art and a great deal of speculation about the art without anybody having looked at, apparently, of the records from the Nazi period as well as the post-war period, where Gurlitt, was interviewed, interrogated, some of his art was seized.
Right.
So that apparently was overlooked. Now, when you look at the art itself, it's maybe exceedingly difficult to sort every piece out.
Yeah, and is there a guarantee now that we're going to know who the original owners were of all, what do we have, 1,400 pieces here?
No.
But is there agreement? Is there an agreement or some type of treaty that guarantees that the original owners have a right to reclaim the art?
There is nothing. Under German law, it may be very difficult for the heirs of former Jewish owners who lost their works of art during the Nazi period.
Why is that? I mean, the world would think that for the descendants of Jewish victims of the Nazis, that it would be very easy for them.
But we have no provisions in German law, today on the books that accommodate that request. There are no international binding agreements, legally binding agreements for Germany to as for the government to step in. For all argument's sake, for now, everything is private property of Mr. Gurlitt.
So it's basically finders keepers is what you're saying, unless Mr. Gurlitt says, I don't want it anymore.
Unless he gives it up, unless there's some sort of deal. But I have to tell you from my own experience, I have made many claims on behalf of Jewish heirs in this country with private collectors or with the trade where things reappear. And my success rate is very discouraging. So I'm afraid from a legal point of view, a strictly legal point, this may end up being a rather disappointing story for many, many people.
Well, Father Simon, what about public pressure here on Mr. Gurlitt? Is there some force there, do you think, that could work for a greater good to get this art returned to the people that it was taken from?
I think this issue is a mixture of politics and a moral issue. And I have the impression that whatever the government does, it might be wrong, it might be right. And the media are trying to, press forward on decisions. And I think it's in Germany there is a complex legal system. You could not just force an investigation. The investigation is not yet over, but the people want results.
I read that there is a possibility, it's being thrown out maybe as a trial balloon, that Mr. Gurlitt could be offered this settlement. Okay, we won't press tax evasion charges, but you have to give up all the art.
Well, I don't know whether that's a very attractive deal. There clearly is millions, many millions of dollars worth of art at stake.
$1 billion is what?
Well, that may be a bit optimistic,
okay.
But certainly a considerable amount of money at stake. And Mr. Gurlitt would have to have a very serious tax problem, don't you think so? In order to lose this art collection. I'm still not quite sure where the connection really is between these tax charges, which haven't been specified, and the seizure of the artwork. I'm not quite sure how that is really related.
You're right. There's not a lot of information out there for us to go on, but what I've been able to put together is tax collectors basically went to his apartment because they had failed with written correspondence to get in touch with him, and they had questions for him. And when they went into the apartment, this is what they found. And Germany, as we know right now, is getting really hard on tax evaders. And I can't imagine that the tax man would have looked at this case and said, we're just going to let it go.
Yeah, but I also read in the newspapers that the man had a bank account with a serious amount of money in it. And why was that not enough? And on top of it, the prosecutor seems to indicate that he's not interested in the current location of Mr. Gurlitt. There doesn't seem to be a flight risk associated with him. He doesn't seem to be interested in talking to him. So, usually if you have a tax charge, you want to make sure that you know where the person is. You want to make sure that the person is not going to escape. And indeed, you want to be able to hold on to some assets. But why that required, as I said, to move 1,500 works of art or 1,400 works of art from his apartment to a warehouse still puzzles me.
Yeah, so many puzzles because the authorities aren't telling us much, Alexander.
Yeah, well, that's probably due to the fact that there are many open questions with regard to possible tax offenses. We don't even know whether the tax offenses have been committed. That's what they're trying to find out. But coming back to the question of publication of all pictures and lists of all pictures that have been found in the flat, it is certainly correct not to publish them all around straight away, because there is a privacy issue in the sense for those pictures which undoubtedly belong to Mr. Gurlitt, where there's no question that he owns them legitimately. So we have a mixture. We have a number of pictures which have been robbed from someone else, bought under illegitimate circumstances, and others which legitimately were bought by him. So this mixture leads to the consequence, I think rightly, to sort out those pictures which undoubtedly have been taken from Jews and their families and which should be reclaimed by others. And the other part of the pictures, there is no reason to publish them. So we have a complicated situation here.
Before we move on, Willi, you live in the United States. So what brings you? Are you being a detective while you're in Germany right now?
Well, I'm here working on another case, which is the Max Stern collection, also from Düsseldorf, where Gurlitt lived after the war.
Has anyone contacted you about this case yet?
About the Gurlitt case? Yeah, well, of course, from the minute it was on the internet, I received my first phone calls, and of course people wanted to know more about it, and whether there any connection with any cases that I'm working on. Of course it does, because Gurlitt's role was so significant. But again, I have to say, legally, I'm not quite sure where this is going to go. I mean, now we have 25 pictures online. But where are we going to turn with our claims? Not to the people who put it online, not to the Berlin government. We would have to find Mr. Gurlitt ourselves and hand him, our letter with our claim.
So there may be no one then at the end of the day.
I think we have
claims with.
We have some additional information, but we have sort of more mysteries on top of mysteries, I think.
Very final question. If this deal is reached with Mr. Gurlitt and he says, okay, drop the charges, the state can have all of the art, is it then the state's responsibility to give this art back or even to compensate?
Well, if Mr. Gurlitt decides to donate his art collection to the German government, yes, then the German government would, of course, be under tremendous pressure based on the washing principles and sort of international understandings to sort it out and return whatever can be returned.
All right. Yeah. Well, the story has some long legs on it, I think. We're going to be talking about this again. Let's move on. Bring this show right here to Berlin. Berlin is front and center right now in the NSA spying scandal. One reason, allegations, of course, that the NSA tapped the German chancellor's mobile phone. Another reason, Berlin appears to be destination number one for people connected to leaking classified information. We've spent 2 weeks on this show discussing Edward Snowden's request to come to Berlin to assist the government in its spying investigation. Snowden has not made it to Berlin yet, but if he does, he'll have plenty of company.
Germany has been rocked by allegations that both the U.S. and Britain have been listening in on Chancellor Angela Merkel and her government from their embassies in Berlin. But against the backdrop of this increased espionage activity, a growing number of web activists involved with NSA leaker Edward Snowden are also seeking refuge in Berlin. British journalist and WikiLeaks staffer Sarah Harrison, seen here on the left, has been working with Snowden since his arrival in Russia. She's now in Berlin because her lawyers say she's no longer safe in Britain. U.S. activists such as Jacob Appelbaum or Laura Poitras, who filmed the Snowden interview, also moved to Berlin, at least in part to escape harassment and intimidation by the U.S. government. Will Germany's strict data protection laws suffice to provide a safe haven for these activists?
Alexander, is that what we're looking at? Has Germany created a refuge for people who leak?
I don't think this happened systematically. It's certainly a critical discussion going on in Germany, probably more critical on the NSA scandal than anywhere else. But just to make it clear, data protection law it's not the function of data protection law to protect whistleblowers or refugees. In fact, we don't even have a proper legal protection for whistleblowers in this country, as opposed to the United Kingdom, for instance, where they paradoxically have such a law. But I do think that Berlin has a positive environment where lots of startups are here based in Berlin. There are a lot of nerds. The Chaos Computer Club is based here. So there may be some sympathetic environment for people around WikiLeaks to come to the city.
I mean, it's an interesting thought, though, to put nerds and whistleblowers here, into the same pot. But is there, though, there's something here, because we do have all of these people coming to Berlin. For some reason, they feel safe here. Maybe they feel like they can't be watched and tapped as easily. But, I mean, the German chancellor can tell a different story, can't she?
Well, what we learned during the last 4 months is that every one of us can be watched. There's no safe haven anywhere if you look at the NSA and other intelligence agencies. So it's all relative protection from monitoring anywhere in the world. But in Berlin, certainly we witness a very concentrated discussion on what the consequences from these findings, which we owe to Edward Snowden, we should draw. And that's probably an attractive moment and an attractive element why so many people are coming to the city, among other things which make Berlin certainly very attractive.
What about Sarah Harrison? She is a reporter from the UK. She has been told openly, if you come home, you know, you could be detained. And so her decision was to come to Berlin. That's a big statement, isn't it? Willi, what's your take on that?
Well, in certain countries, as you know, particularly in the United States, this whole thing is still under the headline of national security, which I think is being used, to put it mildly, to pretty much justify almost anything. You know, in terms of this creepy kind of spying on anything that people, you know, exchange in terms of communication. And apparently it is also being extended to individuals who are associated with leaking information, that they are now more or less providing you know, help to the enemy, that they are violating national security interests. So it's I think a very dangerous mixture of you know, global spying activities to whatever limit, you know, technology allows you to do, and pursuing individuals, you know, who are more or less resisting this kind of attitude, and all justifying it because of national security.
Yeah, I was earlier this year. I was at the Whistleblowers Award here in Berlin, and a statement was made that the Germans have gotten it right because of their past. The Americans need to take lessons from the Germans in terms of respecting each other and each other's privacy. Father Simon, do you agree with that? Does that then make Berlin the better place to be?
I think Berlin still plays a very big role in international politics, not only because of the Euro crisis, but also the relationship between the Americans and the Europeans. I think what happened in Berlin has a major impact on how international relationships will be conducted in the future.
And how do you think? I mean, a lot of people would say that we're walking on thin ice right now in relations with Washington.
I think there is a need for more dialogue between nations and more transparency. Of course, if the economy plays a major role in conducting these dialogues, then it will become more complicated.
Willi, how do people in the United States, how do they look at Berlin? Or is it even on the radar right now? I mean, they haven't even been talking about Edward Snowden as much as we have in Europe, have they?
Well, Edward Snowden is a traitor, basically, and I think that the official view has not changed on that. It's clearly an embarrassment, you know, that they spied on Angela Merkel and other foreign leaders. But again, thanks to the overwhelming concern about national security, that, you know, any of this could aid terrorists in the Middle East. I'm afraid, you know, whatever agreements we may have, I don't think that is going to prevent the NSA from pursuing whatever, you know, spying activities they think they can pursue. I mean, I'm a student of history, among other things. I've read, you know, countless intelligence documents from the 20th century, and it's my impression spies spy, and they spy to whatever extent they are able to spy. So I think, you know, whatever...
And that's not going to change. But
I don't think so. I don't think the NSA is going to, discontinue certain programs.
But Alexander, why does it feel like then Berlin is a safer place for people who dare to leak classified information, or people who work with those leakers?
I'm not sure if Berlin is really a safer place than, say, Paris or Madrid or Rome, but I agree with Father Simon that certainly Berlin, the German government, plays a pivotal role right now on the international stage. If any sensible, reasonable consequences are to be drawn from this, we need an international agreement. Where are the limits to intelligence agencies? Maybe they will never accept any limits, but the German government has now initiated a United Nations resolution together with the Brazilian government to formulate certain general limits to this and to the protection of secrecy of telecommunications. This is vital. And on the other hand, we need technical methods of self-defense. We need
Do you think, though, that hacktivists, people who are activists and who are computer hackers, do they deserve special protection? That's getting a lot of talk around the world right now, and they're talking about it a lot here in Berlin. Do they deserve protection?
I think they do. I think we do need a national and an international framework for protecting whistleblowers which have disclosed information stemming from violations of the law, even maybe human rights violations. There is no justification to keep this kind of things secret. There have even been international documents being drafted. There is a limit to keeping information secret if it stems from human rights violations. So that's a very essential point to make, and maybe the German government, I hope the German government will take this point up.
But it seems that the NSA has worked, I mean, that concerns me, has worked with some of the big communications companies, you know, to access information. I mean, I have a telephone line through AT&T, so you know.
Well, the whole world knows that now.
Yeah, they're
Willi.
telling me, you know, AT&T is telling me we protect your privacy. I get this in the mail every month.
Well, yeah,
well, you
just said it on an international show, so the whole world knows. Alexander, before we let you go, let me just ask you, in the morning when you get up and go to work, I mean, how does it sit with you knowing that this city is being known now as the place to be if you are a whistleblower, if you're a hacktivist? Is that something your office is proud of?
I'm glad that the city offers a place to be for these people. It's not for me to claim to be proud on this, but I think that's a good development.
All right, we'll have to wrap it up there. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the show today. That is going to wrap up this agenda of this edition, I should say, of Agenda with Brent Goff. Remember, you can contact me anytime with your thoughts on the show. You can find me on Facebook. You can tweet me at Brent Goff TV, or you can send me an email. You see the address on your screen. If you want to watch the show, go to our website or watch us on YouTube. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Join me next time when I set the agenda.